I absolutely love the Stalker franchise. Every time I think about it or hear other people talk about it, it's generally seen as a title that truly stands out on its own. Whenever I think of immersion or atmosphere in a first-person shooter, Stalker is the very first game that comes to mind before anything else. They are the kind of iconic games out there that many other titles try to do the same thing with, only for something to feel missing or just not feel as good in comparison. Look at the Souls-likes or the Call of Duty-likes or even a lot of retro shooters that are just being retro for the sake of being retro. Stalker is a game in its own league. From the living and breathing zone, the persistent activities of the ongoing factions, the emissions and wildlife that permeate the zone constantly, for a long time I could not find anything like it. And while there are games like Metro and Chernobylite, they have a similar feeling of atmosphere, mind you, they do miss the mark on a lot of other aspects that make Stalker truly special. Then there is the case of Escape from Tarkov. It's a game that on one hand is similar, but also ditches a lot of the anomalous elements of Stalker to make it its own thing, while still having somewhat of a similar experience to Stalker. It's a game that I'm not very familiar with, at least compared to Stalker, but it is a game that I've watched and observed over the years. A game that represents a genre that has been growing in popularity for some time, the extraction shooter genre. I'm not really a battle royale person, but I can get behind the idea of extraction shooters, for they seem to be the best compromise of both PvE and PvP in the same gameplay loop, and Tarkov's application has even influenced some upcoming projects that are also inspired by Stalker, as well as other upcoming shooters as well. I've brought together a small list of some games that seem to fit the criteria I have in mind, which consists of open worlds or open-ended levels, vitality checks and an emphasis on surviving and making crucial decisions that can affect the outcome of your playthrough, and all of them single player of course. For this video I want to focus more on lesser known examples since people generally already know about Metro and Chernobylite, but I would highly recommend the Metro series and Chernobylite if you're looking for more story-driven experiences. As for other games within a different genre, Atom RPG and its sequel, Turbograd, are also similar thematically, as well as the Escape from Knox County mod pack for Project Zomboid. Those are also games and mods that I would highly recommend. But the list I have here are mainly just shooters, with some being top-down based. So let's get into it, shall we? Number 1. Zero Sievert. Say you took both Stalker and Escape from Tarkov and decided that the third dimension just wasn't going to cut it. So you squish them both into the second dimension and brush it with pixelated graphics and a top-down camera. Well, the end result would be this game, Zero Sievert, a game that has been in development for some time, powered by the Game Maker engine, born out of a passion project by the developer, taking two great games and making a 2D blend out of it. It has a number of different weapons, items, gear, a crafting system, vitality checks, different zones that randomly generate that you can explore, finding loot and then extracting out of. Even though the game itself is in early access, it's made a ton of progress. Functions well, has challenging combat that makes each expedition dangerous, but equally rewarding when you manage to get out of there unscathed. It works well even with mouse and keyboard, and the graphics are quite nice as well. Enemies are tough, and even the presence of NPCs in the wild can put you on edge, and sometimes they might even call out for help, only for them to be bandits that will destroy your run. If you don't mind the fact that it's a 2D game and it's top-down, then you'll find what I found to be one of the only games that's like Stalker and Tarkov but in a 2D format. Number 2, Road to Vostok. Part of what makes Tarkov great is the feeling of gunplay. Every gunfight is intense and every bullet sound could be the last one that you hear. Road to Vostok looks to capture that feeling but in a single-player environment, at least for the time being, that offers a similar experience but for those that don't want to deal with sweats the first time around. Basing itself between the border of Finland and Russia, you play as someone that seeks to reach a place called the Vostok. Along the way, you'll come across enemies that want to kill you, all the while having to deal with managing and storing loot, finding NPCs to trade with, and partaking in events. It's currently being ported to the Godot engine, but progress seems to be pretty steady, and the gunplay and the graphics look really good so far. The idea of extraction shooters is one that can also be applied to a single player or a co-op based setting. Just look at Deep Rock Galactic for instance. Even so, the idea that this game also mixes in permadeath and difficulty scaling maps also adds more strengths to Vostok's hardcore oriented experience. There is currently a demo that you can try out if the idea of a Tarkov-like single player game intrigues you. I really look forward to its continual development here. Number 3, Karantiin. This game is a potential gem that I found on itch.io, another haven for indie horror games that filter out a lot of other genres, especially shooters. Unless you know specifically what you're looking for, it can sometimes be difficult to find something up your alley. Eventually though, I would end up finding this game. Karantiin seems to be a mix of horror and survival, mixing elements of Stalker and Resident Evil, as you can tell by the enemies and the inventory menu system, as well as even the herbs that you can find that you can mix together. It's being made by one person and the developer seems to keep it in a continual state, where it'll just keep getting updates until the developer feels like it's done, so in effect, there's no release date for it. It has a number of weapons that feel pretty nice to use, an in-game currency system with a station that lets you buy items, and a few enemies that can give you both bleeding and infections, which is where the resource management comes in, since you can't hold much. It's admittedly a rough looking game and there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but it's also a game that has a lot of potential surrounding it, and it's important as an aspiring game developer to recognize that some gems are going to be rough until you chip around the edges, where a diamond may come out of it. In the available demo, it's got a wave-based mode, 2 scenarios, and an open world mode to play around in, which still needs a lot of work, like I said. Also, if you have a VR headset, then there's a version for it in development, and yes, you can also smoke in it. Definitely check this game and give the developer whatever support you can in its development. Who knows, it might even become the Resident Evil version of Stalker down the road. Number 4, Dark Skies, the Nemansk Incident. The history of game creation engines is one of asset flips and stigmatization, but sometimes there comes some genuinely impressive projects where the developer puts their heart and soul into the project, making something that not only stands out, but even turns out to be decent after all. For the Game Guru engine, Dark Skies is that game. It's a lot like Stalker in its themes and atmosphere, but with the limitations of Game Guru. It'll still look and play like a Game Guru game. The weapons feel decent to use, enemies are kind of dumb but can still hit you from a distance, and a lot of the times you have to be vigilant because they could always be in the bushes or around the corner hidden behind a lot of shit. It has a bunch of levels and a hub area that includes a firing range and a raid mode. It's a little bit more streamlined compared to the other games because you usually only have to worry about making sure that you have supplies, like for health, as well as ammo for your weapons. Other than that, you don't need to worry too much. The levels themselves are also open-ended, but are separated between loading levels. So for those expecting a full-on open world game will be disappointed here. This game, however, is proof that you can take something like Game Guru and still make a decent and enjoyable experience that pays homage in its own way to one of the most unique shooters ever made. Is it on the same level as Stalker? No, but it doesn't have to be because it's already made its mark in the Game Guru community. Definitely check this game out, but also keep your expectations at a minimum, especially if you've already come from Stalker. Number 5, Apocalyptic Vibes. Now, I'm a huge fan of Doom. It's pretty much my favorite shooter franchise of all time. And the game that I always come back to in the series is Doom 2, and it's because of the modding scene. Case in point, this game in particular, Apocalyptic Vibes, is based off of the GZ Doom source port for classic Doom. If the game didn't make that clear from the beginning, you wouldn't have been able to make the connection because of how different it looks in comparison. It's kind of like a retro version of Stalker with its Eastern European apocalyptic setting, hazardous weather conditions, and punishing enemies that can put you down faster than a careless drink of the Green Ferry. Doom 2 has also had some survival-based mods like Lit Doom and Lost in Darkness, but this one wraps its coat around the setting that is like Stalker and even a bit of The Road by Cormac McCarthy. If you're already a fan of the classic Doom games and have played other mods before and want something more survival-based, then this is the one worth checking out. There is both a demo and a price tag for the full game, so you can try out the demo first to see if this one clicks with you. Number 6, Darkwood. Now this one is quite different from the rest, but I wanted to recommend this game anyway because not only is it amazing, but it's also something that invokes a similar feeling to Stalker, as in the sense of dread, the feeling of isolation, and the constant shift of the world surrounding you, all the while being its own thing, rather than trying to be exactly like Stalker. Like the zone in Stalker, the forest in Darkwood is always changing in one way or another. It's more of a survival horror game though, with a mix of crafting, exploring, and defending against some truly horrifying threats, especially when it's nighttime. It's also one of the best games in terms of sound that I have ever seen so far. The game is oppressive, even with just the sound of creaks in the bush or the slight opening of a door. You're always on edge in this game, hoping that you've got enough fuel into the generator for the night, and breathing a sigh of relief when it's finally daylight. Darkwood is something of its own while still drawing some parallels to Stalker with its Eastern European roots. It's a game that I followed for a long time up until its release, and it's still one of the best survival horror games ever made. It would even be in my top 10, honestly. People that wanted Stalker but more survival horror based are in for a treat with this one. Number 7, Containment Zone. This is another game that puts you back in the zone, but not the same one. With freakish mutants, sketchy NPCs, and hostile enemies that want to kill you. It brings together a tactical-centric approach to its gunplay, a resource management and inventory system, a semi-open world, vitality checks, weather system, pretty much like Stalker. Basically, it has a lot of things that you would expect to see in a survival-based shooter. Stalker and Tarkov both have elements of survival in them, and the threat of danger can come from NPCs or even other players, as evidenced by Escape from Tarkov. This game's focus, however, is the single player for the time being, but the developer does plan to incorporate a PvP mode for people fiending for multiplayer. So far, the game is really impressive, and also shows what one person can do when they rise to the challenge of game development and make the game that they've always wanted to make, rather than something that is easy just because they're a starter. Like some of the games here, you can try out a demo for the game, but there is no release date confirmed as of yet. It all kind of hinges on where the developer ends up in the long run. But I hope that this game does have a future, because it'll inspire young and hungry developers to put in the work and make more of these type of games, which I'm all for at the end of the day. It's showing a lot of promise so far for what is just currently a demo. Definitely check this one out if you're in the market for some looting and shooting in an Eastern European zone. As for more examples, these three are VR based, which means if you don't have one, too bad. Moving on, we have 3 winners here: Into the Radius, Convergence, and Ghost of Tabor. VR is something that I have no regrets getting into. It is a bit of a hefty investment in the beginning, but it's one that you'll be glad that you did invest into once you finally get into all of the games that are available as of today, and you have your first time experience. The only regret that I do have is not playing enough of it, especially when I know that games like these 3 are out there, along with many others, with Convergence still being on its way. Into the Radius is one of those games where it feels clunky at first, but when you get some equipment, a pack of cigarettes, some canned food, and an energy drink, and you watch the atmospheric landscape while you virtually drink and smoke at the same time, it offers a level of immersion that can really only be found in VR. To fully understand it is to try it out yourself. No matter what I say, it's just something that you have to experience to understand it. And it's the same case with Convergence from the looks of it, which looks to be a lot more closer to Stalker but in VR format. And Ghost of Tabor takes the Escape from Tarkov path, but in VR form. VR is one of those things, like I said, where the investment might seem a bit much, but when you finally rip the band-aid off and just buy one, as well as trying out your first game, it's an unforgettable experience. These kind of games are one of the many reasons why I'm in full support of further development of VR gaming. Into the Radius, Convergence, and Ghost of Tabor are the best examples I can find that match the similarities of Stalker and Escape from Tarkov in VR form, and we recommend looking into them if you own a headset. As for Convergence, you will have to wait, but it does look really good so far. And that's about it. I'm sure there is more out there that I may have missed. Feel free to mention them in the comments. And also, for the sake of clarity, the video was more focused on open world styled games, or games with open-ended levels at least, including resource management, inventory menus, and vitality checks, and of course single player. Some of these games show a lot of potential even in their incomplete state, but some have already been done and dusted like Darkwood and have made their mark in the indie scene. I love Stalker and have an appreciation for Escape from Tarkov and what it brings to FPS gaming. But those games are really hard to top and make exactly alike because they are just very, very good at what they do. Even though that these games that I've just mentioned do come close or have a lot of potential to come close. Hope you find something that you enjoy here. If not, there's always next year. There'll likely be more projects that may fit the bill or what people really want, which is Stalker 2. Stay tuned and thank you for watching.